Hello and welcome to another episode of the Halloween Podcast. I am your host, Lyle Perez, and you're listening to episode 10 of our special series, The Dark Record, where we uncover some of the strangest, most unsettling events history has left behind. Tonight's story is one of mirrors, silence, and obsession. It's about two sisters, June and Jennifer Gibbons, whose bond grew so strong it shut out the rest of the world. They spoke only to each other, created a language no one else could understand, and carried their strange pact of silence into adulthood, where it ended in a tragedy no one could explain. The next entry into the dark record, the Silent Twins. Let's begin. June and Jennifer Gibbons were born on April 11, 1963, in Barbados to Aubrey and Gloria Gibbons. Their family moved to Britain not long after, settling in Haverfordwest, a small town in Wales. Aubrey worked as a technician for the Royal Air Force, and Gloria stayed home to raise the children. In theory, this should have been a promising new beginning for the family, but reality was far more complicated. The Gibbons family was one of the few black families in their community, and in 1960s Wales, that meant they stood out immediately. Aubrey and Gloria hoped their daughters would grow up with opportunities they never had, but instead, the twins quickly became targets of racism and bullying. Other children mocked their accents, their skin color, and the simple fact that they were different. This constant rejection planted the seeds of isolation that would grow with June and Jennifer throughout their lives. From the earliest years, it was clear that the twins shared an unusual bond. They spent nearly every moment together, rarely leaving each other's side. Their parents noticed how they mirrored each other's movements, almost like shadows in motion. If one picked up a toy, the other would do the same. If one frowned, the other mirrored the expression instantly. They weren't simply close siblings. They seemed bound by something deeper, an unspoken understanding that needed no outside reinforcement. The differences became most obvious when the twins started school. Teachers noticed almost immediately that June and Jennifer barely spoke in class. They avoided eye contact with other children and rarely responded to direct questions. When they did speak, it was usually to each other in a rapid, hurried language that no one else could understand. What sounded like gibberish to outsiders was, in fact, a private blend of English and Barbadian Creole. Linguists would later identify this phenomenon as cryptophagia, a secret language that sometimes develops between twins. Most twins who experience it grow out of it. For June and Jennifer, it only grew stronger. The silence confused their teachers, who alternated between seeing it as stubbornness or extreme shyness. Their parents worried, but had little idea how to intervene. To the outside world, the twins appeared unreachable. Other children avoided them, finding their quietness unsettling. Some even teased them for the way they seemed to move in unison. These early experiences shaped the twins' understanding of the world. It was hostile, unwelcoming, and unnecessary. All they needed was each other. By the end of their childhood, June and Jennifer were already slipping into their own reality. The world had pushed them away, and they responded by building one of their own. A world of silence, a world of mirrors, a world where only the two of them belonged. As the twins entered their school years, the strangeness of their relationship became impossible to overlook. To their teachers, June and Jennifer were not just quiet children. They were completely withdrawn. In the classroom, they sat together, rigid and unmoving, their eyes fixed on each other rather than the blackboard. If spoken to directly, they often didn't respond at all. And if they did, it was in hurried whispers no one else could understand. What unsettled many observers was not only the silence, but the way they seemed to function as one. Their movements were often perfectly synchronized. If one scratched her head, The other's hand would rise almost in the same instant. If one slowed her walk, the other automatically adjusted her pace. People described it as eerie, like watching two bodies guided by a single mind. The situation became even more concerning when psychologists were brought in to evaluate the girls. Specialists observed them during school and at home, only to come away baffled. The twins were not intellectually impaired. Intelligence tests showed them to be bright, even gifted, but they seemed locked away from the outside world. The problem was not ability, but choice. They spoke easily to each other in their secret language, yet flatly refused to communicate with anyone else. Teachers, worried that their silence was holding them back, tried an experiment. In the early 1970s, the decision was made to send June and Jennifer to separate boarding schools. The hope was that by being apart, they would be forced to interact with other children and break their dependence. But the plan failed almost immediately. Without her sister, each twin shut down completely. Separated, they became like statues, silent, motionless, barely participating in daily life. Teachers described them as catatonic. June later recalled that it was one of the most traumatic experiences of her life. Instead of thriving apart, they withdrew even deeper into silence. When they were finally reunited, the bond was stronger than ever, and any hope of breaking it had disappeared. The failed separation attempt only reinforced the sense that their connection was beyond ordinary. Doctors began to see their silence not as simple mutism, but as something more deliberate, a pact. June and Jennifer had effectively decided, though perhaps never spoken aloud, that no one else was worthy of their words. The silence became their shield against a world that had excluded them since childhood. Yet even at this stage, beneath the silence, there were signs of tension. Observers noticed that Jennifer often seemed to take the lead, with June following. If Jennifer refused to do something, June would mirror her refusal. If Jennifer gave in, June usually did too. The dynamic hinted at a subtle imbalance, one that would only grow more pronounced as they got older. By the time they were teenagers, the twins were already legends in their town. Strange, inseparable girls who spoke to no one but themselves. Few could imagine then how dark that bond would eventually become. By the time June and Jennifer reached their teenage years, their world had become almost entirely self-contained. Shut out from their peers, ignored by their community, and misunderstood by teachers, they turned inward. What began as whispers in their secret language evolved into something more elaborate. Pages and pages of stories, poems, and plays. Writing became their voice, their outlet, and their prison. The twins filled notebook after notebook with fiction. Their stories were not lighthearted or playful. They were dark, often unsettling, and full of themes that reflected their own lives. Control, confinement, love turned sour, and the destructive power of obsession. Jennifer wrote a story about a young woman whose devotion to a man twisted into cruelty. June explored tales of betrayal and punishment, including one in which a boy died of rabies after falling into bad behavior. These weren't childish scribbles. They were works charged with violence, desire, and dread, showing a creativity that fascinated those who later studied them. Their ambition didn't stop with private writing. June managed to publish a novel in 1981 through a vanity press. The book was called Pepsi Cola Addict, a strange and haunting tale of a teenager seduced by his teacher and later thrown into prison. Jennifer wrote her own manuscript, Discomania, about a group of young people possessed by the beat of disco music. The subjects may sound bizarre, but the themes were clear: loss of control, seduction, entrapment. Both sisters wrote about the same things they felt in their own lives. If their fiction revealed their imagination, their diaries laid bare their souls. June wrote openly about feeling dominated by Jennifer, describing her as a kind of dark shadow with frightening control. "She is my enemy, she once admitted, "but without her, I am nothing." Jennifer, meanwhile, confessed in her diary that she felt compelled to hold June back, even while loving her more than anyone else. "We are one," she wrote, "but one of us has to die." It was this duality, love and loathing, unity and rivalry, that defined their teenage years. To the outside world, they appeared united, inseparable. But in private, their bond was a battleground. They competed fiercely, yet also collapsed without each other. Observers noted that if one refused to eat, the other would push away her plate. If one lay still, the other mirrored the motion. Their dependency was total, but it carried a poisonous undercurrent. By their late teens, this inner war had begun to show in their behavior. Their writings revealed not just creativity, but a dangerous intensity. Their mirrored routines no longer looked like simple closeness, but like a trap neither could escape. Their silence, once just strange, now seemed sinister. And as the 1970s drew to a close, the tension between them was reaching a breaking point. By the end of the 1970s, the lives of June and Jennifer Gibbons had spiraled into a dangerous rhythm. Their silence and mirrored routines had shut them off from the world, but their diaries showed how restless they had become. Both craved freedom. Both longed to experience the things that ordinary teenagers did: romance, friendship, excitement. And yet, because they could not break their pact, they sabotaged every attempt at normal life. With a little place in their community, the twins began experimenting with rebellion. It started with small acts: shoplifting cosmetics, stealing candy, wandering the streets late at night. At first, it seemed almost ordinary teenage mischief. But for June and Jennifer, mischief became an outlet for the turmoil they carried inside. Their diaries reveal that they felt a rush in these moments, a rare chance to break out of their suffocating bond. The thrill escalated quickly. By the early 1980s, the sisters had moved beyond theft to more destructive acts. Vandalism became their release, smashing windows or breaking into buildings when no one was around. But it was fire that truly captivated them. They began experimenting with setting small blazes, trash bins, piles of debris, even abandoned sheds. Watching flames consume what they touched seemed to mirror the anger and frustration they felt but couldn't voice. Their obsession with fire came to a head in 1981 when they set fire to a local technical college in Pembrokeshire. The blaze spread rapidly, causing significant damage to the property. It was no longer a minor act of vandalism, but a crime that demanded serious consequences. The twins were caught, arrested, and brought before the court. What followed stunned many in their community. Rather than receiving short prison sentences, June and Jennifer were declared in need of psychiatric treatment. The court ruled that they should be detained under the Mental Health Act, not for months, but indefinitely. They were sent to Broadmoor Hospital, Britain's most infamous high-security psychiatric institution. The decision shocked their parents. Broadmoor was a place known for housing some of the country's most violent offenders, serial killers, murderers, and patients considered beyond rehabilitation. It was not where anyone expected two teenage girls, guilty of arson but otherwise harmless, to be placed. Yet there they were, committed indefinitely, their future entirely out of their own hands. For June and Jennifer, the sentence was devastating. Their diaries document feelings of despair and betrayal. They were trapped again, this time not just in silence but in the walls of an institution with no end date. Jennifer wrote that she felt like a zombie, while June described it as being buried alive. Broadmoor would be their world for the next 11 years, and it was inside those walls that the darkest elements of their pact would finally surface. Broadmoor Hospital was unlike anything June and Jennifer had ever known. Founded in the 19th century, it was Britain's most notorious psychiatric facility, built to house those deemed both mentally ill and dangerous. By the time the twins arrived in the early 1980s, its reputation was grim. Broadmoor was synonymous with violent criminals and infamous murderers. Patients included men who had committed horrific crimes, serial killers like Peter Sutcliffe, known as the Yorkshire Ripper, and other figures who made headlines for the brutality of their acts. The fact that 2 teenage girls were placed in such a place stunned not only their family, but also journalists who later followed their case. The atmosphere inside Broadmoor was heavy and intimidating. For June and Jennifer, who already struggled to communicate with the outside world, it must have felt like another kind of prison. Yet their bond remained unbroken. Doctors and staff noted that while they rarely spoke to anyone else, when alone together, their communication was constant. It was as if their private language became more entrenched under confinement. Medical staff described them as existing in a strange state of psychic symbiosis. Their conversations were rapid, intense, and often laced with laughter or anger that no outsider could decode. To observers, it was clear they were living in a shared world, one that shut out even the most persistent attempts to reach them. But what fascinated doctors most were the twins' writings. Both continued to keep detailed diaries, filling thousands of pages with their thoughts. These journals revealed the depth of their love and hatred for each other. June wrote about feeling oppressed by Jennifer, describing her as a dark shadow with the power to control her. Jennifer, in turn, admitted that she sometimes felt she had to suppress June, even while acknowledging that she couldn't live without her. The diaries often read like confessions, filled with contradictions and violent imagery. One passage from June's diary captured the intensity of their struggle. "We have become fatal enemies in each other's eyes. We feel like we are one person, but that one person is cruel, destructive, and evil. If one of us dies, the other must begin to live." Psychologists debated how to classify them. Some diagnosed selective mutism, a rare condition where a person refuses to speak in certain contexts. Others pointed to cryptophagia, the phenomenon of twins creating a private language. But June and Jennifer's case didn't fit neatly into either box. Most twins outgrow secret languages. Most people with selective mutism eventually respond to therapy. For the Gibbons sisters, silence and secrecy had become the foundation of their very identity. Journalist Marjorie Wallace, who began covering their story during their time in Broadmoor, saw their diaries as windows into a world the rest of us couldn't comprehend. Wallace would later describe their writings as both heartbreaking and disturbing, proof of a bond that was both intimate and destructive. Inside Broadmoor, the silent twins continued their strange dance of dependency. They wrote, they whispered, they mirrored each other's movements. And as the years passed, it became clear that their pact of silence was not weakening. If anything, it was hardening into destiny. After more than a decade inside Broadmoor, June and Jennifer were finally given a chance at change. By the early 1990s, doctors had decided the twins could be transferred to a lower security facility in Wales, where the environment would be less restrictive. For many, this was a hopeful step forward, a chance for the sisters to finally rejoin the world outside those infamous walls. But for June and Jennifer, the transfer meant something more. Their diaries and conversations during this period show that the sisters had been circling a terrifying conclusion for years, that both of them could not continue to live as they were. Their pact of silence, their mirrored lives, had become unbearable. Both longed for freedom, but both felt trapped by the presence of the other. Again and again in their writing, they returned to the same idea, that one of them had to die so the other could live. On the day of the transfer in March 1993, Jennifer seemed unusually subdued. Normally animated when speaking privately with June, she was now listless, her movements slow. As the two sisters rode together in the van that would take them to their new hospital, Jennifer rested her head on June's shoulder. Witnesses later reported that her demeanor was strange, as though she were exhausted or resigned to something inevitable. It was during that ride that Jennifer spoke the words that would haunt everyone who studied their story. She said, "I'm going to have to die." She didn't whisper it in fear or despair. According to June, she said it as if it were a simple statement of fact. Hours later, shortly after arriving at the new facility, Jennifer collapsed. She was rushed to the hospital, but doctors could do nothing. At the age of 29, she was pronounced dead. The cause stunned the medical staff. Jennifer had suffered from acute myocarditis, an inflammation of the heart muscle. There were no signs of drugs, no poisons, no foul play. She had not been ill in the days before. She had shown no symptoms that would have suggested heart failure. To the outside world, it looked as if she had simply willed herself to die. Her death defied explanation. Some suggested that years of psychological stress had taken a physical toll, weakening her heart. Others pointed to the possibility of a rare, undetected condition. But for those who had followed the twins' story, it was impossible to separate her sudden end from the pact the sisters had carried since childhood. June herself later admitted that Jennifer's death felt like the fulfillment of destiny. In her words, her sister had chosen to die so that she could live. The eerie sense that Jennifer had known her role all along gave the tragedy an almost supernatural weight, leaving behind questions no medical report could ever answer. Jennifer's sudden death left doctors and journalists stunned, but no one was more affected than June. For 29 years, she had lived in lockstep with her sister, walking, speaking, eating, and even breathing in sync. Their bond had been so complete that few people could imagine either of them functioning alone. Yet, in the hours and days after Jennifer's passing, something remarkable happened. June began to speak. For the first time in her life, June communicated freely with those around her. She spoke with nurses, doctors, and even her family, who had long struggled to reach her. To journalist Marjorie Wallace, who had documented the twins' lives for years, the change was astonishing. Wallace described it as if a spell had been broken. The silence that had once been impenetrable dissolved almost overnight. June herself admitted that Jennifer's death had freed her. In later interviews, she confessed to believing that her sister had sacrificed herself so that she could live. "I'm free at last, liberated and at peace with myself," she told Wallace not long after Jennifer's passing. But the statement carried a weight of guilt too. June never denied that she loved her sister, nor did she ever stop mourning her. She acknowledged that their relationship had been destructive, even poisonous at times, but she also insisted that Jennifer's death was part of their pact. One of them had to die for the other to survive. In the years following Jennifer's death, June worked to build a life of her own. She left institutional care and eventually settled in West Wales, close to her family. Freed from the silence, she began to interact with the outside world in ways that had once seemed impossible. She participated in family gatherings, spoke to neighbors, and lived independently. Though she remained private and cautious, she was no longer the mute shadow of her childhood. Yet Jennifer never left her thoughts. In interviews, June has spoken tenderly about her twin, always with love, but also with a lingering sadness. She acknowledged the control Jennifer held over her, but also the comfort of their shared world. Losing her sister was both the greatest tragedy and, in a strange way, the greatest gift of her life. June's transformation after Jennifer's death has puzzled psychologists as much as the twins' silence ever did. Was it the breaking of a lifelong psychological pattern? Was it the lifting of a burden she could never escape while Jennifer lived? Or was it, as June herself seemed to believe, something fated, the inevitable conclusion to a pact written in their own secret language? What is certain is that Jennifer's death marked a turning point. For the first time, June was able to exist as an individual, separate from the mirrored bond that had defined her entire existence. In life, the twins were inseparable. In death, Jennifer had given June the chance to step into the world alone. The story of the silent twins did not end with Jennifer's death or June's release from Broadmoor. If anything, it only deepened in fascination. Over the years, their lives have been dissected by psychologists, journalists, and artists, each searching for an explanation, or at least a way to understand how two sisters could live in such a strange, self-made world. One of the most important contributions to their legacy came from Marjorie Wallace, the journalist who spent years interviewing the twins and combing through their diaries. Her 1986 book, The Silent Twins, remains the definitive account of their story, offering rare insight into their private world. Wallace's work brought international attention to June and Jennifer, framing their lives not just as a medical case, but as a human tragedy. She described their bond as both beautiful and destructive, a kind of love story that ended in sacrifice. Their story has also been told through documentaries, stage productions, and even film. In 2022, a feature-length movie titled The Silent Twins was released, bringing their haunting tale to a wider audience. Each retelling underscores how unsettling their lives were, too strange to ignore, too complex to explain away. Beyond media portrayals, the twins have become a subject of debate in psychological and medical circles. Were they suffering from selective mutism, trapped by anxiety and trauma? Were they exhibiting cryptophagia, taken to an extreme that never faded with age? Or was their silence and mirrored existence something unique, a phenomenon with no clear name? For some, the case highlights the limits of psychiatry, how even with decades of observation, the essence of their bond remained beyond understanding. Cultural context also plays a role in how their story is remembered. As children of Caribbean immigrants in a predominantly white community, June and Jennifer faced isolation from an early age. Racism and bullying shaped their childhood, pushing them deeper into silence. Some argue that their retreat into each other's world was not just a quirk of twinhood, but also a survival mechanism, a way to shield themselves from a society that excluded them. There is also the enduring fascination with twins themselves. Across cultures, twins have often been seen as mysterious, two individuals who share a bond beyond ordinary relationships. Folklore is filled with stories of psychic connections and mirrored lives. June and Jennifer seem to embody those myths, their lives unfolding like a modern legend of unity and division, love and rivalry, silence and sacrifice. Today, June lives quietly in Wales, occasionally speaking about her sister in interviews. She has never denied the strange nature of their bond, nor the role it played in Jennifer's death. Her willingness to talk after decades of silence is itself remarkable. But even she cannot fully explain why things unfolded the way they did. The silent twins remain an enigma. Their lives challenge easy answers, leaving behind a story that is at once psychological case study, cultural commentary, and haunting mystery. Were they victims of circumstance, creators of their own prison, or evidence of something we still can't explain? Perhaps the truth is all of these at once. What endures is the eerie sense that June and Jennifer always knew how their story would end, that one would speak only when the other was gone. And that pact, written not in words, but in silence, ensures their place in history as one of the strangest and most unsettling cases ever recorded. That brings us to the end of episode 10 of The Dark Record. We've traced the strange, haunting lives of June and Jennifer Gibbons, two sisters bound so tightly together that the world around them all but disappeared. Silence, obsession, and finally, a death that raised more questions than answers. Remembered, retold, and now added to the record. Next time, we'll step into the streets of Paris in 1901, where two school teachers claimed they slipped not just through gardens at Versailles, but through time itself. Was it delusion, a shared hallucination, or an authentic brush with the past? we'll examine the mystery of the Moberly-Jourdain time slip. Until then, I'm Lyle Perez, and this has been the Halloween Podcast presenting The Dark Record. If you enjoyed the episode, don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. It helps keep the show alive and weird. You can also explore sources, extras, and more at our Facebook page at facebook.com/The Halloween Podcast or our website, thehalloweenpodcast.com. Thanks for listening. Stay curious, and remember, some pacts go deeper than words. Have a good night.